Welcome to episode 3 of season 3 of Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Mr.
C.H. Siddons. Sidions, I think it's pronounced.
There's
two people in my new school, and they during the beginning of the year they called me Sidan, Mr. Sidan.
What about?
Because I talk way too fast. What
about Mr. Sidions?
No, there's one that was Sidons.
Sidons.
Okay. Yes.
I like it. That's
right.
good.
I went to him first, Mr. Grable, because in earlier tapings when I went to you, our intro,
I was too boring.
No, it wasn't just.
That's what he's really thinking.
It was. I just felt like we were jinxed a little bit.
Okay, got
Mr. Peter Grable.
Hey, what's up, man?
How you doing, man?
Great.
It's good to see you.
Yes.
Welcome back, folks, to Ed's Not Dead. We are very glad to have you. We've got a great show today. We have the one and only Randi Weingarten on the show.
We do.
We've been trying to get her on for a year. And
Let that sink in for a minute. We have Randi Weingarten.
I know.
The president of the second largest teachers union in America.
Yeah, it's a big get for us.
Yes.
Credit to Mr. Crable for his persistence.
His
and
dogged
I don't
emailing.
want to make it sound like Randi was hard to get on the show. She's just a very busy person.
Yeah.
Extremely.
Yep. So we're excited to have Randi on. We're going to talk all things public education with her. And let's go to our swag giveaway.
Swag.
Whoa.
The lime green Ed's Not Dead stickers, 2 of which I have on Dodd cars.
Looking good.
Looking very good.
I need to do that.
In order to get a sticker, you have to give us a review on iTunes and tell us about it on Twitter. So you can't just give us the review. You have to give us a heads up.
That's
right.
Or tag 10 people to listen to this episode. So do it. It's a low bar to get.
We'll send you a bunch. Hand them to your family, your friends, your dog.
Stick them on your forehead.
There you go.
Friend of the show, Bob Sinclair, I tried to give him one when I ran into him, and he said he had already been sent like more than than I think he wanted.
He was like, I just wanted one.
Yeah. How many did you send him, Crable?
Somewhere between 5 and 10.
Okay.
I kind of just grabbed a handful.
That's a little excessive.
It is a little excessive.
No, you can never have too many stickers.
Yeah, you just never know.
Too many Ed's Not Dead stickers.
You can never have it.
The trick is you just have them lying around, and people are like, "What am I going to do with all these?"
That's
and
right.
somebody comes in and goes, "What are those?" And then they take them.
That's right.
My daughter Nora has one on her MacBook Pro.
Nice.
And she digs it. Yeah, so keep the ratings going on iTunes because, Mr. Krabs, you got a metric for us?
Yeah, I 3 years in, finally figured out how you can determine where you are in the iTunes ranking.
Mm-hmm.
Cracked the top 150.
Hey.
Yeah, and flirting with the top 100. So I was like, oh, maybe that should be something that we look at periodically.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. On the show today, once again, we have Randi Weingarten, and then we are going to bring back Dear Betsy.
She's back.
In our last segment.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't she?
She had a busy week last week, Monday and Friday off.
Was she threatened by a federal judge?
We'll tease it there, but yes, there was a federal judge involved.
Okay. All right. And then Mr. Sid's quiz.
We got a quiz.
Okay.
It's Teacher Strikes 101. A little bit of mixed bag along with it. Yeah.
So topical. Look at you.
Because as we record, the Chicago teacher strike is happening.
Ongoing,
Yes.
Yep.
Anything else, boys, for the good of the Ed's Not Dead audience?
I want to get to this interview because Miss Weingarten has a lot to say. Very informed, very intelligent, and looking forward to it.
Should I be annoyed? I noticed on Twitter that Mr. Kaz has more Twitter followers than me. He's getting up there.
Yeah, he's getting in the thousands.
You're like pushing 2.
Yeah.
He's getting to be quite the social media educational. Is he an influencer? Is Mr. Kaz?
I think he might be getting up there.
Is he close to being an educational influencer?
He can be a Twitter troll too.
Nice.
Really?
A little light trolling.
At Mr. Cos 31?
31. That's right.
Is he the one that said that our sweet pictures on edsnotdead.com look like my wedding and you were my ushers?
He might have said that. Yeah.
We joked about that privately in the moment.
That was pretty funny. All right, you can find us at Ed's Not Dead PC on Twitter, and as I just mentioned, edsnotdead.com. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. All right, fellas, we are incredibly excited to have Randi Weingarten, the president of American Federation of Teachers, on the show. Welcome, Randi, to Ed's Not Dead.
It is great to be with you guys. And, pretty soon you're going to have a whole new title about Ed is alive and well.
I know. Yeah, I mean, we may need to think about that. Yes.
You're one of the first guests, though, that's gotten the irony of it and how it's, Ed's not dead. And, everywhere we're like, public education, alive and well.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are so glad you're on the show. We've been working to get you on, and we know you're very, very busy. So we're incredibly grateful to have you on the show. AFT was founded in 1916 and today represents, I hope I get this right, 1.7 million members across the country. That's correct, right?
Absolutely. In fact, we just won an election yesterday for the entire University of New Mexico faculty, part-time and full-time.
Wow.
Another 1,600 people.
Congratulations. All right, so let's start with a global question. What are the top issues affecting teachers and public education right now?
Well, let me answer it in two ways. And these days we actually have a little palm card where we talk about all of these things. But the same issues that affect kids and affect America, affect parents, are the issues that affect teachers, because teachers are actually now the first responders in schools across America to everything that is challenging in the United States of America. So, you can go micro and talk about things like, investment in schools and how you deal with it. You can talk about things like the freedom to teach and how do we make sure that teachers actually have the latitude to meet the needs of kids and, teach based upon what they believe kids need. You can talk about welcoming and safe environments in schools and in streets, particularly in light of, I think it's up to 260 mass shootings this year.
Right.
We can talk about generally the whole issue of how in this, in this period of time of extreme economic inequality, existential threats to our democracy, and growing and a dangerous and growing ethnic and racial division, how do we actually make sure there is the freedom to live on decent wages? How do we make sure that there is health care that's, so that you're not one illness away from bankruptcy? How do we make sure that student debt does not crush people?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that there's retirement security? So the reason I'm going through this litany is because at the end of the day, there are so many issues that affect teaching and learning because there are so many issues that affect America.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back to, and it's so great to talk to three educators who are doing this podcast, because think about, what Dewey was trying to do. Think about what Dick Tocqueville said so many years ago, when he observed American democracy,
Mm-hmm.
and was just so awed by this notion that in this, very then fledgling democracy that had, that had its weaknesses, but one where we were driving for the common bond that
Mm-hmm.
brought Americans together, yet at the same time embracing and valuing the diversity that was then America and is now America.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say they kind of fall into all of those issues, how to deal with the extreme economic inequality, the existential threats to our democracy, the dangerous, really dangerous kind of throwing out of truth and growing ethnic and racial divisions. And, we have to, and I'll end with this. So what we think we have to do is focus on strategies that we have to focus on children's well-being and make sure schools are welcoming and safe environments. We have to focus on funding our future. So NEA had, and focused on Red for Ed. And I think the next step of Red for Ed is to take anger to aspiration, to take fear to hope, and focus on how you fund our future and how you deal with these disinvestment and privatization issues. And we have to make sure that teachers are treated like the professionals they are and have agency and the ability to and the freedom to teach. But then we also have to really focus on how we create cultures of collaboration, and that with our bigger communities, make sure there is the freedom to live.
All right. So you talked about making sure teachers are treated like the professionals that they are. One of the things that I'm proud of is that, as opposed to my two millennial co-hosts, I started 25 years ago in education, and I feel like I can remember a time when I started scapegoating and demonization of teachers. And I'm curious, because you've been at this so long on behalf of teachers, can you put your finger on when teachers became disposable or demonized as the problem in education versus who they are, which is the folks that really give our country the future?
Well, I would actually say there's probably 3 or 4 major points here. So number one was probably in 1983 with the nation at risk.
Yeah.
But it's too simple to say, okay, business got involved, wanted to get involved, and wanted to find a way that, they found, enemies, or they found, protagonists and antagonists, let me say it that way. But that was a turning point. If you look at, frankly, if you actually looked over 150 years ago, there have been cycles in public education where we went through another cycle of factorization and of, routinizing everything versus the whole, fighting for the whole child and fighting to educate the whole child. So we've gone through a whole bunch of cycles. But in recent history, let's say that over the 50 or 60 years of Title I, for example, Johnson came in with the war on poverty.
Right.
And let's look at it through that lens. Sorry, I'm a social studies teacher.
No, that's good.
So
Yeah.
we look through it through that lens and the war on poverty. And where he focused, first Kennedy, then him, and remember, he was a teacher in rural Texas, and saw that poverty, and saw that if you want to level the playing field for kids, you have to make sure that the federal government actually gets involved, not just calling balls and strikes, which is what Duncan and what the Bush administration
Right.
whatever did, but also actually giving the resources so you can level the playing field. And that's what Title I and that's what IDEA was supposed to be about. So the first 25 years of Title I, of the war on poverty, you saw huge gains in schools that had, impoverished kids who were mostly or disproportionately black and brown, and you saw huge gains. And so then, but the second 25 years, or actually now, and I would put the last 5 years in a different place, the second 25 years became accountability. And so that's why I kind of look at 1983, because what then happened in 1983 was this sense of two things collided. One was, well, we're not getting to 100% proficiency. I would actually say 100% mastery, because that's our job, that's our goal, to help all kids get to their potential. So then you started seeing the blamers and the shamers, and this disproportionately female profession then became blamed by people who actually spent no time in classrooms.
Right.
And then it got increasingly worse with No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
And frankly, I would put, even though I love President Obama, but I think that Arnie Duncan was a lot part of this top-down accountability, competition, if they can't do it, just fire them, close schools, and this notion that you just have to shake people up. And all of that was happening at the same time as we had in the in 2005, 6, 7, the worst recession since the Great Depression. So when I say you had two kind of things colliding, you had austerity because of the recessionary forces, colliding with these kind of plutocrats who spent no time in classrooms, who then decided they knew better than we did, colliding with the right wing who wanted to, like the DeVos types, who wanted to get rid of public education anyway.
Right.
So that's how competition and testing and reducing it to a test score, to an algorithm, became the strange bedfellows with austerity.
Yeah. All right, good. Thank you.
So I'm glad you brought up all these other issues that maybe some people wouldn't think about as education issues. One of the things that we've talked about on the show is how schools and public education doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it reflects society as much as it drives society. So being in the thick of, presidential elections and primaries and all that, candidates are starting to release ideas about how to support and or bolster public education, some more bold than others. You and AFT have been, very vocal in terms of supporting specific candidates and or ideas. So my question is, how do teachers, who I have always kind of envisioned as having to be apolitical and neutral and sort of arbiters as opposed to activists, so how do teachers balance that role between advocating for themselves, which ends up advocating for specific politicians, versus the kind of dispassionate arbiter for students?
Mm-hmm. So I think that on some weird level, even though it was completely wrongly decided, I think that, meaning I don't believe that the First Amendment limits the freedom of association, and which is what unions are, and where bar associations can levy fees for everybody who's a lawyer, and a university can levy fees for everyone who gets benefits from the university. It's hard to see why unions don't have the right to have a fair share if people are getting those services.
Right.
However, again, I digress. What it did was the Janus decision completely freed people up from drawing a line between collective bargaining and other kinds of things that you do in direct service to schools, professional development, terms and conditions of employment, conditions of kids, and politics. It just basically, there's no longer, since everybody can either join or not join, there's no longer that line. And I would actually argue that in our classrooms, we have to be very careful to make sure that we help kids, give kids the tools that they need to arrive at their own decisions on politics. We have to be careful about that. But I think we are the guardians of democracy. We are the nurturers of student minds. We are trying to help ensure that kids, can unlock that kids develop the skills and the responsibilities and the knowledge so that they can actually navigate their own lives.
Right.
But part and parcel of that is that public education is foundational to democracy. And so when the rubber hits the road, I don't think we have a right, believe it or not. Well, let me say it this way. I don't think we can sit on the sidelines. And given that half of America didn't vote in the last election, the issue is how do we actually get people engaged and involved and feeling like, while not everyone can do, no one can do everything. We have to fight and encourage people not to sit on the sidelines and to do something.
So go ahead.
That's part of it. Let me just say that's part of why we have completely revamped the AFT's nominate or endorsement process to be focused not simply on what candidate shares our values and what candidate can be elected, and whether you're talking about president, senate, or local offices, because as you know, in Maryland, local offices are just as important in so many different ways. But our focus is on engagement and on empowerment of our members so that they don't sit on the sidelines, so that they get engaged in this process, at the very least to vote, really get engaged.
But so to continue on that point, our number one job as educators is to keep kids safe. And
Correct.
I mean, regardless of your political views, I'm a social studies teacher as well, so we're kindred spirits. I during the 2015 campaign, I found it really challenging to be a neutral arbiter of what was happening with Trump at the time, and it continues to this day, where kids in my classroom felt extremely unsafe. Students who are from, who are Muslim, students who are from Central America, and they were literally in tears in middle school,
Right.
in fear of what was to come, about being sent back or being marginalized. And as a teacher in the classroom, I didn't. It was more of like, I don't even know how to phrase it, but it's like our job is to make sure that they're physically and emotionally safe. And if that means that if I'm going to say that I'm not supportive of Trump and his policies, then I'm going to say that.
Right. And I don't think that that's, I think that the real issue becomes in an election period, it's going to be, I'm not sure that we in our classrooms, let's draw the distinction on policy versus who is elected.
Right.
So I think in our classrooms we can conduct a debate about, sorry to go all social studies on you. So say we could conduct a debate and not put our own viewpoint in there about, but our views are going to be obvious by the way in which we ask a question. But be trying to, draw a line so that they're making a decision, they can draw a conclusion, as opposed to, us saying, well, I'm for Hillary, or, I'm for Donald Trump, or I'm for blah, 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 blah
Right.
this time. But I think that that's different about policies. I think that it's perfectly, and I agree with you, when we think about things like gun violence.
Right.
That should we be sitting on the sidelines? Should we be not encouraging people to go to the March for Our Lives rallies
Right.
that were about making sure that kids are safe in school? I think when it comes to policies that, and there's, that as long as we have a way of mooring it in something that is absolutely vital in schools,
Right.
such as safe and welcoming environments. The same in terms of what's happening in terms of the Chicago strike.
Right.
The issue, part of the strike, one of the provisions that they are seeking is what we got in the charter school strikes in Chicago, sanctuary status for schools so that ICE cannot walk in without a warrant to take kids away for the very same reasons as you just expressed. The issues of a nurse and guidance counselor, these are front and center in the Chicago strike.
And I think, at the end of the day, every single year adds on more social woes that public education and public schools are responsible for. And they're placed
Right.
on the shoulders of teachers and administrators. So I think one of the things that you were talking about earlier with regard to Title I funding is, how are states and federal government, how are states and federal government itself supporting and strengthening public schools? What are your thoughts on what the federal government could do more, or how individual states could do, or what should be left to the individual states to do themselves?
Right. And then there's a bigger question, which is the funding, the fundamental funding
Right.
of schools.
Yeah.
Because to the extent that it's funded in a property tax system, it will always be funded inequitably. And so what happens is, because that's not going to change tomorrow, and maybe in some places it will change in our lifetime, and maybe it will not. But that's why the federal government becomes so important as a way of leveling playing field,
Absolutely.
as a way of leveling for poverty. And that's why Title I and IDEA, there's a bunch of others as well, but Title I and IDEA become so important because what district, say you have a lot of medically fragile kids in your district, shouldn't the federal government, through Medicaid, through IDEA, be helping significantly to pay for that?
Yes.
Because those kids need, we want to level the playing field. And the same in terms of, I would argue, English language learners, the same in terms of, kids who come from poverty. So I know we have this kind of fiction right now that the federal government pays for about 10% and states and localities do the rest. And in the state that, I spent most of my life working in, New York, it was about 10% the feds, 30% the state, 35% the state, and the balance, local taxes. And, at one point or another, you had all of those finance cases all throughout the country. But, so I think that the federal government has a lot of roles in terms of being a clearinghouse to share best practices, being the, it's hard to say, being the, the accountability agent where it comes to justice, given, what's going on right now. But at one point or another, it really should be the enforcer of civil rights, like it did in Little Rock and other places, in Brown versus Board of Education. And there should be a lot of funding. So I think, for example, and innovation funding and funding to, try new things and be a clearinghouse for strategies like NIH is. Like, why don't we have an NIH
for education.
Analog in education?
Right. Yeah.
Why did we get for years, the philanthropies funding, what they wanted to fund, but that they had the money, so all of a sudden you had a lot of funding on how good charter schools are, and you had a lot of funding on testing and on value add, as opposed to NIH doesn't do that. They fund to find the solution to cancer. Why don't we have funding? Why don't we have research institutions that are really thinking about what are there better strategies in the teaching of reading?
Right.
What happens? Is pre-K really, 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 really as important as we think? And if so, why is pre-K not funded, just like the solution to cancer is, funded? So, sorry, I'm just going on a riff. But this then becomes like what a new president can do, I think, in a new era where I think you see public education getting, people recommitting. And I don't know if it's because there's such a terrible, Secretary of Education who cannot hide her disdain for public schools.
Oh, yeah.
No, she just hides from schools themselves, that's all.
Yeah. Say it again?
I said she just hides from schools themselves.
Yeah, that's true too. But but you're seeing overwhelmingly, whether it's the PGK poll, we just did a poll of rural areas across America, and public schools became the most important piece, the most important policy and advocacy that rural Americans, small town Americans really want. So you can see people coming back together again for the same reasons as you just said. They want their kids to be safe.
Right.
And public schools, that is not only our aspiration, that's our responsibility, and it's also our responsibility to build community, and it's also our responsibility to do knowledge and skills. But it's pretty, even in this horrible time, this divisive time about whether or not we'll have a democracy, it's amazing how many people are coming back to saying, wait a second, we need our public schools.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
So you've talked quite a bit about funding and fully funding public schools. And, in the last, year or year plus, we've had the Red for Ed movement pushing for funding. We've had a number of strikes pushing for, amongst other things, improved salaries, improved working conditions, increased student support services, etc. So I guess my question is, is there going to be do you foresee a point in the future in this country when we say, oh, wow, we expect public schools to do X, Y, Z, and if we really do expect them to do that, we need to fund them appropriately? Or, the sort of opposing current forces are, well, they're not meeting standards. Look how much money we're already putting into them, so let's just continue to decrease funding and create a totally parallel set of schools on a totally separate track.
If you asked me that question 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said we were on the trajectory, despite all the fights, of the latter. But I do actually think that we're starting to move towards a responsibility to the public schools that 90% of kids in America attend.
Right.
And it's been, and I say this as someone one of whose predecessors started the charter movement, Al Shanker.
Yeah.
And I actually run a charter school. I still run a charter school in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, with Steve Barr, and our kids, the high school graduation rate has been like 95 to 100%.
Does everybody
all these years?
Does everybody know that, Randy? Is that like a big announcement on Ed's Not Dead?
Yeah, no, it's pretty known.
Okay.
What it is, but what it is that think about this school could compete with Eva on stats every day. Every day.
Right.
But it doesn't fit that narrative that her schools are better than public schools.
Right.
So it doesn't get the play. But all I'm saying is that there's a role, just like there's a role for career tech ed, a huge role. There's going to be a role in a big public system. There is a role for charters that actually act in some weird way as magnets these days.
Yeah.
And this, but you have to make sure parents have a neighborhood public school, whether it is an elementary school or a middle school, and I would even argue a high school, although, you can make a whole bunch of different arguments about, high schools needing to be more regionalized. But there has to be a neighborhood public school that is great and that parents feel they can send their kids to.
Yeah.
And that is our obligation. And I would also argue it should have wraparound services, and that the services in a community should be wrapped around a school, because the schools then become the center, the heartbeat of communities, which is what happens in rural areas and what happens in Silver Springs. I remember I grew up in Rockland County, New York, in Clarkstown, New York. My cousins grew up in Silver Springs. They kept talking about, the schools in Montgomery County. I heard about the schools in Montgomery County as I was growing up.
Yeah.
And the kind of enrichment and AP courses and sports and other things, the things that kids want, and get kids to come to school.
Yeah. I was the principal of a quasi charter, and the line I always use, Randy, about school choice is that, and if you're on the receiving end, it can be tough, that oftentimes what happens is if you're in a school choice arrangement, somebody ends up being the New York Yankees and somebody's the Kansas City Royals, based on interest of kids, and that can be a really tough narrative to break out of for a school.
Absolutely.
So,
but it's also think about it. Look, I'm married to a rabbi. I'm a pretty observant Jew. Yes, I know it's Saturday, and yes, I'm doing this with you. But I go to shul as many Friday nights as I can, and I don't. And there are parents who say, I want to send my kids to a religious school.
Right.
They should have that right to do that.
Absolutely.
The issue is taxpayers basically fund public education.
Yep.
And they fund public education with a set of requirements about equality and opportunity, and that should be our role. Not that we should say that people shouldn't, go to Catholic school or a religious school, but I think that people like DeVos conflate these two and have tried to use charters and vouchers, weaponize them to undermine and destabilize public schools and to pit people against each other.
Agree. So before we end, and you've given us so much time, we'd like you to do a little forecasting for us, Randy. We had John Saphir of Research for Better Teaching on recently, and like you did, he gave us an overview of the changes in education from his perspective over the last few decades. And he ended up saying that we were currently in the data era, which I know all three of us here on the show would agree with because it's pretty much ruled our lives as educators, especially over the last 2 decades. I was curious, this is a two-parter. First, have we finally jumped the shark with data and value-added measures for evaluation systems in the United States? And secondly, use your crystal ball. What's the next big movement that we'll see that will dramatically affect our schools?
Okay, so number one, I think that we're in the turn.
Good.
I don't think we've jumped the shark yet.
Okay.
Can you
We are
define?
in
Wait,
the
hold on.
turn.
Time out. There's millennials in the room.
Okay, Randy.
I'm sorry.
No.
What does
Sorry.
what does jumping
We're
the shark
leaning
mean?
in.
What is,
We're leaning in.
thank you, because
Randy, let's just for a quiz. You do know what jumping the shark refers to, right?
Because I don't.
Yeah.
Okay, right. They did.
I do.
Well, okay, good. My two.
But that's only because I have people in my life that are that in all phases of life, so that I get my culture from lots of different people and lots of different
You didn't watch.
Yes.
You didn't watch Fonzie jump the shark on Happy Days.
I did.
Okay, all
But
right.
I was trying to
Okay.
not tell you that I was 61 years old. I was trying to be cool
Okay. All right. Okay.
about this.
All right. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
So I actually think we're in the turn. I don't think we have conquered this yet, but I think this notion that everything can be reduced to a data point, the fixation on data as opposed to the fixation on kids, I think that the fixation on kids is winning the debate. The question becomes, and this kind of gets to both your first and second question, is what we've never done in education. And this should be what a blue ribbon, the next, hopefully, now wear my politics on my sleeve, hopefully there will be a different president in 2020.
Right.
But I think that what we have not done in recent history is there is not a common definition or a common answer or an answer that a consensus-based answer to the question, what is the purpose of education? And I think if we can actually drive towards that answer,
Mm-hmm.
then that then becomes not just what's measured, that then becomes what the focus is in the next 10 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I might say, all of us might say, it is about, helping all kids, regardless of geography or demography or zip code, whatever, reach their potential, achieve, have the skills and knowledge and character traits and attributes and whatever, so that they can achieve their dreams, not just dream their dreams. So we would come up with something that we would say that is very child-focused. But in the last, in the No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top era, it was all data-focused. And schools are pretty compliant. Look at what's happened after all these mass shootings. 96% of schools now have active shooter, drills. So schools were very compliant about the data. We need to bust out of that. And this would be my hope, which is how do we actually get to a common enough definition of what do we need to do to help in public education? I would say it's nurturing our democracy, it's nurturing kids' minds, their souls, and their bodies, and it's actually being the economic propeller of the United States of America. And if we actually did that, then all of a sudden you'd have a lot of resources in public education. You'd have wraparound programs. You'd have an array of different things, because when people would see that the public schools are the economic propeller and the foundation of democracy, as well as nurturing children, then all of a sudden the public schools become really, really important.
Absolutely. That's That's like, we should steal that quote and use it as our foundation for why we did this podcast, because we just wanted to have fun and like have a great conversation about education. And what you just said is like the embodiment of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And
Exactly right.
Randy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. As you are a lifelong learner and educator, we have to end our time with a final exam before you go. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
All right. Well, you may know this, but in Norway,
Just don't make it multiple choice.
it is multiple choice, but you can do it.
ABBA.
So, but in Norway, Randy is a name that emerged. Randy with an I is a name that emerged in the 1400s as a short form of Rangfrid. Did you know that? The original meaning
I did not know that.
The original meaning in Old Norse is God lovable. We have 3 questions about famous Norwegian Randys, and if you answer 2 out of the 3 correctly, you're going to win some Ed's Not Dead swag. Are you okay with that?
I love that. Do you know what Randy is in Britain, though?
I don't.
So I'm not going to go through this in your podcast because then...
I need to know now, though.
He knows from Austin
R-A-N-D-Y.
Powers. Come on.
Oh, jeez. I didn't think about that. Well, we're going to go with the Norwegian one.
Okay.
So, number 1, Randy Blair, Blehr, was a famous Norwegian in the 1880s and eventually founded, I'm going to butcher this word, Kvinnsagforeningen, which was what? A, the association,
No idea.
The Association for Women's Rights, B, the Association for Furniture Builders, or C, the Association for Fisherwomen.
I bet it was C.
That was a nice guess, but it's actually A, the Association for Women's Rights.
Okay, good. All right.
Oh, wow.
I would have guessed C too.
The word is Kvinnsdagsforening. It's like 17 letters long.
Okay.
Number 2, you still have 2 chances. Randy Elizabeth Drydal and Randy Gustad, both from Norway, are both famous for what activity? A, soccer, B, bookbinding, or C, they're both famous handballers.
They're both famous what?
Handballers.
Like the sport handball.
No, it has to be B.
It is. Are you saying handballers?
No, not the handballers. The one before the handballers.
Bookbinding. Actually, it was C. They're both famous handballers.
All right.
Oh, my God.
I don't even know what handball is.
Okay. All right.
Number 3. There's one left. That's the last one.
She can still get swag. if she gets-
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just for putting up with me. Number 3, Randi Skog, the first Norwegian woman to climb to the summit of Mount Everest, is also famous for doing what? A, purchasing an entire island called Nostholmen to use as a base for nature-based experiences. B, starting a nonprofit for cleaning waste from the trails of Mount Everest. Or C, going back to university to earn a degree in astrophysics.
Ooh.
Oh, my God. This one I should actually know, and I have no idea. So I would say A, B, and C.
Well, actually, the first one you got, the first guess you had was A, and that was correct. She purchased an entire island to use as a base for nature-based experiences.
Interesting.
All right. Well,
And
ahead.
anyway, you just taught me something. I had no idea.
You're in good company with those Randys.
he taught me something too because I had no idea he was going to do that quick.
I have to slide it in. So you're gonna get some Ed's Not Dead swag. So when after we're done here, we'll get where we're gonna send it to you.
All right.
Fantastic. And you do know, as you did that, I did not cheat. Meaning
Good.
I did not go to Dr. Google and try to find the answer.
I definitely would have
I just
done
wanted
that.
to disclose that.
Robbie did.
I think
He
it
was
was
Googling.
obvious by being wrong, but I wanted to disclose that.
All right, Randy. We appreciate you taking so much time to come on Ed's Not Dead. Last question. Do you want our listeners to find you in any certain spot on Twitter or on the
Absolutely.
AFT website? Go ahead.
Let me just say this as I do that. Let me just also thank you guys. It's amazing that you're doing this, and it was really important to do it during the kind of period of time when we're always in this crouched position of, how do we fight for the
Right.
public schools our kids deserve? So I just want to say thank you for doing this and doing this work.
Thank you,
And
Randy.
It's great that you're having a lot of fun with it, but really thank you.
Thanks.
And my Twitter is R. Weingarten.
Okay.
So it's my last name with R.
Got
R.
it.
Weingarten. And, we have the AFT website. We have AFT Facebook at, AFT Union. We have my Facebook that I mostly used for work-related stuff at Randi Weingarten, and we have the AFT .org website where we put a lot of things up all the time. And once a month, I do a column in the New York Times, and that's coming out tomorrow. But
Nice.
we'll put it up on Medium as well.
Okay.
And that's what. And so I'd love to be in touch with your listeners and any of them that are teachers or other educators. I also want to just say thank you.
All right.
Thank you to them.
Congratulations on the big win in New Mexico, and hopefully, maybe after the next election, we'll get you on the show. What do you think?
Great.
Okay.
Great.
All right, Randy. Enjoy. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks. All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead for our final segment of episode 3 in our 3rd season. We're not going anywhere.
Nowhere.
No,
Junior year.
Yeah, junior year.
We're gonna get to
Strong.
episode or season 10 eventually.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Siddons, this
Ready?
is your time to shine. The last
moly.
segment is always yours, and
Jeez.
it's my time of the show where I can sit back and not do
Have a
anything.
few laughs.
Yeah.
You know.
And criticize me for
I know.
my choices.
I will.
That's
it is.
that's all part of the shtick,
It
man.
is. It's great. It's really great. It makes me incredibly angry.
It's also the
How's your
time,
self-confidence
time of the
going?
show where you don't get on your cell phone because you have to pay attention.
Jeez.
All right, go ahead.
So annoying.
What do we
all
do?
right.
Dear Betsy.
Oh, we're doing Dear Betsy. You said a quiz.
Oh, I did?
Yes, you did.
All right, let's do the quiz first.
Okay,
Yeah.
quiz
Well,
first.
and then we'll get to Dear Betsy and her.
Sounds good.
Terrible decision making.
There you
Anyway, number one. So this quiz is all about teacher strikes. Since we're coming up on a teacher strike that's occurring in Chicago, figured it's high time to talk about them and some of the history behind them. You ready?
I'm ready.
Alrighty.
I will point out for our listeners that our 3 years of Ed's Not Dead have been dominated by teacher strikes.
It really has. We happened to start the show at a time when teacher strikes were en vogue.
Yes. Yep. And
Yeah,
then-
the 70s were a big era for teacher strikes, and there was kind of a quieting down over the years, and now we're back into this major time period of worker discontent.
there was a teacher strike when I was in 8th grade.
Really?
And we all got to school and found out when we got there, this was in the days of junior high schools.
Why didn't they just email you
that the school, that the school was going to be closed, and it was
the best day ever.
oh, it was so good. You could see the kids just running away from the school.
Really? Was it-
yeah.
was it
Do you remember
Bedlam?
that?
It was bedlam. Everybody just
bounced.
just took
Did you,
off.
did you take a bus to get to school?
No, I walked. So
What'd
I was
your,
just
what'd
like,
your dear old dad say about it?
I don't really know. I don't recall having a conversation. I was 14.
Yeah.
All I knew was that
School was out.
we were rolling out.
Was this the same day that your brother fell out of a tree and then you laughed at him and then he pounded you? Was that same day?
I was younger then. I was elementary school. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Number one. In 1973, there were simultaneous teacher strikes in Chicago, St. Louis, and Philadelphia, the last of which lasted how many months? A, 1, B, 2, C, 3, or D, 4?
This whole episode has been about threes.
Yep.
So I'm just going to go with threes.
Okay.
I'm gonna go in the low end. I'll say 1.
Okay, well, it was actually 2 months. Lasted 2 months. Philadelphia,
So how did-
1973.
So how do we do that?
Nobody
So-
gets any
Nobody
points.
gets anything. Number two,
It's a
teachers in the Homer School District in Homer, Illinois, embarked on the longest teacher strike in American history, walking off the job on
you do a
October 17th. October 17th, 1986, for how many days? A, 175, B, 76, C, 106, or D, 156
Man,
days.
those are long strikes. I'll go with 156.
76.
The answer is D, 156. Mr. Dodd,
Oh baby.
Look at you. How
You're
many
on the
months?
board.
How many months is that? 5 months?
that's a lot of months.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I wonder how
1986.
big-
So apparently in Homer, Illinois.
Homer, Illinois.
Yeah, apparently there's still massive discontent and distrust in the Board of Ed and the school district today from that strike.
Well, a 4 to 5 month strike would
that's pretty impactful.
would have some
Yeah.
lasting impact.
And there's articles out there you can read about the impact on housing prices, people moving to the area, and just generally people applying for private and charter schools around there.
Okay.
Number 3, teachers in Chicago recently announced they would be going on strike for the blank time in 40 years. A, 4th,
that's a good one.
B, 5th, C, 6th, or D, the 7th.
Wow. So a minimum of 4. I'm going to go 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew you were going to take the minimum.
Yep.
Okay.
Is it 5, 6, 7?
There's 5, 6, or 7th.
Yeah. I'll go with 6, so I don't get caught up in the same thing I did on question 1.
The answer is D, 7th time in 40 years.
Jeez.
Yep. You said 6th, but
Once
Yeah, but I was-
every 6 years.
But I was closest,
you were closest. That's true.
so I get a half point.
All right, number 4. By 1932, the Norris LaGuardia Act outlawed what kind of contracts?
LaGuardia.
Which made teachers promise not to join a union? Was it the A, the Blue Buffalo contract, B, the Green Cat contract, C, the Yellow Dog contract, or D, the Purple Pachyderm contract?
I'm going with the yellow dog.
what was A?
Blue Buffalo.
That's what I'm going with.
All right, the answer is C, Yellow Dog. The Yellow Dog contract, which made teachers promise not to join a union.
It's like you had all the answers beforehand. Okay, yeah, great high fives.
Number 5, and the final question. This number 5 is the final question for this
You're
quiz.
smoking me there. That's why.
It requires some context, so sit back just for a minute, okay?
Tell us a story.
All
It's going
right.
to be so boring.
Oh, you're such a jerk. I hate you. In December of 2018, the wave of teacher activism in public schools expanded beyond traditional public schools and moved to charters from one of Chicago's largest charter school networks called Acero Schools. The impasse related to crowded classes and promoting a living wage. The average paraprofessional was earning $30,000 a year in the city of Chicago, which is $37,000 below what would be needed to live comfortably in the city. Acero CEO Richard Rodriguez makes around $260,000 per year to manage a network of how many schools? A, 15, B, 25, C, 35, or D, 55?
I'm going to go with 25.
I'm going to go with 15.
The answer is 15.
Oh, my God.
The answer is 15.
Well, that's you had
a
to
figure, and he earns a figure of roughly equal
I
to
know.
the salary
That's
earned by
why-
Chicago Public Schools' Janice Jackson, who is responsible for over 500
That's right. That's why you went with the low
schools.
one, huh?
Yeah, because it was disproportionate to
Right.
his
School
span
load.
of control.
Which is wild. So that's the quiz. Dr. Dodd, you have won the prize.
Yes, which is an Ed's
Of
Not Dead
disdain
sticker.
from me.
It was a good quiz, Mr. Sids.
Yeah, not bad.
You get all the
Liked it.
cheese.
I do.
all the cheese.
All right. Now it is time for Dear Betsy.
Cue the Dear Betsy music.
Nothing,
All right.
nothing happened.
And nothing's happening,
Dead air.
unfortunately.
Hey,
all
what-
right.
That's what you want in a podcast.
What happened
Ooh.
when we played Just What I Needed by the Cars
Let's not repeat that
on episode 2?
because that acknowledges.
Did we get a
that-
mean email from someone? Yeah.
Casey does want to talk about it.
Okay, sorry. All right.
Because you know what I said when we decided to do that, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
It sounded so
Please
good.
don't do
It sounded
that.
so cool though.
The
did.
LLC
It
is
did.
in my name and my home address, so I'd rather if you didn't do that.
Yeah, just move.
All right.
Yeah,
dear,
that's how it works.
Dear Betsy.
Dear Betsy, so Newsweek article: Betsy DeVos could face jail after a judge rules that she violated a 2018 order. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has been threatened with the possibility of of jail after a judge deemed she was violating a court order for continuing to collect student debts on a now defunct school. Have you read this, folks? Have you read it? Have you checked it out?
No.
You haven't heard that she's going to be facing jail time? No, it's not going to happen. Anyway, the ruling that was handed down in June of 2018 was made by Judge Sally Kim and prevented Betsy DeVos and her Department of Education for going after former students at the bankrupt Corinthian Colleges Incorporated, something we've talked about on the show before.
For-profit.
The for-profit colleges that close down and then really leave students hanging and hanging in the balance, and they're collecting debt in really awful
Yeah, but their debt
ways.
goes away, right?
That's
does
incorrect.
not.
What was
Does not go away.
What was Trump's? Was it Trump University?
Yeah, I don't know how long that was around. I think
That was for profit.
It was
for
for
sure.
profit,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
It
very
did,
short
it did
amount of
really
time.
great. It did really great.
Friend of the show, Randi Weingarten, let us know what she thought of Betsy DeVos.
She did. Yes.
She did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the other quote that was astounding is she said it. Judge Kim said she was astounded to discover that DeVos was violating the court order at a hearing in San Francisco on Monday because it had earlier disclosed that more than 16,000 former students at Corinthian College were, quote, incorrectly informed at one time or another that they had payments due on their federal student loans. Thoughts, comments, concerns?
Well,
She's doing a great job.
The worst part is 1,800 people lost wages or tax refunds, and so basically had their wages garnished.
Yes, they took it right out of their accounts. Yep.
So
disgusting.
So Rick Perry is stepping down of Secretary of Energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were the departments that he was going to get rid of?
It was three.
Yeah,
It was three of them,
Yeah, but he couldn't name all three.
and
right?
I think one of
Didn't
them he's now leading.
Yeah,
right?
Was it
that's
really?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
One
what
of
it
them
was.
Energy Department?
Yeah, it was energy. But my question was does that make her? No, but Carson's still staying.
Carson's still there.
Okay,
Carson and her.
they're the last two.
They would be the last two, I think.
Interesting.
All the rest are, interims,
You were gonna say-
deputies.
I thought you were going to say dead and gone.
No.
I don't really have. I don't really have.
No, it's just
She's
the prioritization of
profit.
profit. Yep.
Yeah, over
Anything else?
the wellness of kids and the futures of students.
And it really shows I'd hate to say it, but the lack of attention that people take, the lack of attention to federal education policy.
Yeah.
Because she's doing awful things, but yet
if you search Betsy DeVos, like that's what comes up recently, but it was not. I had to search for it, I think, to find like, all right, what's going on with Betsy DeVos recently? I was like, oh, well, this was just a week ago that this happened.
well, there's other
Not okay.
people in the cabinet who are doing things that are questionable at best. And they've all had their heads rolled over a period of time, and they've all lost their jobs because they've lost favor with Trump. And for some reason, Betsy has not.
I thought it was interesting what Randy said about how much she loved Obama, but that obviously the relationship with Arne Duncan, former Secretary of Education, was quite
Somewhat fraught.
Yeah, complex.
And and it's funny because we've talked about it because we said, we have not been any great fans of Race to the Top, and in our discussions have said, it actually wasn't really all that good.
Right.
No.
Pitting schools against each other. And
Right.
again, if we just have this huge axe out to teachers that, if you don't, then, you're
Right.
gone. It's like,
Right.
well, it's not that they're not trying.
Right.
Which seems to be the implication.
And if you want money from the federal government, you have to evaluate teachers every
Yep.
year.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I can see where AFT would not be in support of that.
I could see that. Yes.
Yep. All right. Good job, Mr. Sids.
Thank you.
Dear Betsy was back.
Yeah, she's back. She's still here.
I do think somewhere along the line she figured out that probably keeping a lower profile was better than speaking publicly.
Of course.
It helps that her husband donates millions and millions of dollars to the Republican Party.
Yeah, well, she definitely has her own views about. Well, I don't think her views about public education are not positive.
No.
I mean, Randy basically said her whole goal is to
Just undermine and dismantle.
Yep.
dismantle. All right.
There is no system.
There is no system. Thanks again, folks, for joining us. You can find us on Twitter at EdsNotDeadPC. And, of course, you can log in on FB. That would be Facebook.
FB.
My FB friends.
You can log on on the interwebs with FB.com.
EdsNotDead.com.
Yes.
And as always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. On our next episode, we're psyched we're going to have Ricardo Cano, a reporter with Cal Matters, who is going to enlighten us with his massive expose in Cal Matters disaster days on all the instructional time missed in California over the last decade or so because of myriad things, but mostly natural disasters.
Mm-hmm, yep.
So it's going to be great. You tracked him down, didn't you, Mr. Sids?
Yeah, he's a prolific writer
Yeah.
on education, something that's not really paid attention to a lot in the States, but he does a great job.
You crossed paths with him when when he was a reporter in Arizona, right?
That's right, AZ Central, and we had him when we got in touch with Hoffman,
Yeah.
Secretary Hoffman.
Yeah.
So we're excited to have him on the show, and hopefully we'll continue the relationship as more of these stories continue breaking, because the weather ain't stopping.
That's right. All right, don't forget, get on iTunes, give us a rating. We'll send you some stickers, right, Mr. Krabs?
Done and done.
Okay. All right, folks, we appreciate you tuning in. Thanks again. A special thanks to Randi Weingarten. I didn't almost forget her name. I almost forgot her title. President of the American Federation of Teachers. We really appreciate her coming on Ed's Not Dead. All right, we'll see you next time. See you, fellas.
Bye.